And plus, I have Maria, and I also have Sabra here with us as well. Today, we're going to be talking about anxiety, and we're going to talk about all the modalities that go along with that, with the personal feelings, what you might feel inside. Like I know throughout this whole pandemic, and Sabra is going to explain a little bit more about what anxiety means and where it takes us. But for myself personally, anxiety going through this pandemic has been quite an ordeal, such as the dread I feel, the depression that I've gotten from it, and other things which we'll talk about throughout the show here. So today we'll have about an hour, just over an hour, to talk about this in any great detail. And well, first, did you want to say anything before we get started?
No, okay, just go right ahead.
Okay, well, I'm going to pass over to Maria and to Sabra to introduce yourselves, and then we're going to just get right on to it.
Hey, Stuart. Hey, Nicola. Hello, everyone watching out there on social media. And hello to Sabra as well, who's here with us today. This is going to be an awesome episode or show. Yeah, Sabra, do you want to say a few words?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Hello to Maria, Nicola, Stuart, and all the listeners.
Oh, we lost you.
Oh. Did you lose me? Okay. I was just saying hello to Maria, Nicola, Stuart, and all the listeners far and abroad. Welcome, and it's nice to be with you again today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maria.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Thank you, Sabra. I can't wait to talk a little bit more about what we're talking about today, anxiety, because I am a sufferer of such topic and have no qualms about talking about it. I'm really excited to hear what Sabra has to say. She has some opening statements about what the pandemic impact has been specifically related to anxiety. So I'm going to pass it on to Sabra. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I see there are 7 people watching us live. This is so cool. Thank you. Nice.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, just as some opening remarks, and Stuart has already mentioned that, the pandemic and the stresses that and anxiety during this pandemic, definitely. And as we've seen, it's over a year, the pandemic seems to persist. And life can be, and quite understandably, more stressful due to the heightened a sense of uncertainty, isolation, and loneliness as a result of the lockdowns. And there's so much uncertainty as to when the lockdown will be over, when we can go back to whatever we knew to be normal before the pandemic. So believe it or not, and not to anyone's surprise, more and more people are experiencing anxiety. And sometimes the anxiety leading up to depression, which is not at all, as I said, surprising. And often people say, well, life is stressful, what to expect? Yeah, life is stressful. However, in my experience, what I found that when we are aware of what one is feeling, and what is our state of mind. In other words, if a person is able to acknowledge what one is feeling, and then to know that it's okay not to feel okay 100% of the time. I think that's a huge step, and we will talk about that more as we go along. So today we're going to talk about anxiety, and going to start off with Maria's question about what is anxiety. And as Maria also mentioned that she is somebody who deals with anxiety, and so have I. One of the interesting things to remember about anxiety, that anxiety in generally is a response to fear or stress, and which is a natural response, and it can be very useful. These feelings of stress and a degree of anxiety can be very useful, particularly in some situations where, in fact, they operate as a saving alarm system. It's triggered off in the face of a threat, and then we know what we are, we could be potentially facing, and take a decision that would protect us. So, for example, the one common example that comes to mind that I think everyone can relate, it's like when we are trying to cross a street. And what we usually do, depending on whether you're in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, which side of the road you drive, you look to either the right and then the left, or the left and the right, to see whether the road is clear. And when there is some traffic, there might be some anxiety while we're making that decision. But that is very useful kind of nervousness. So that kind of anxiety is there to serve a purpose, and the purpose is to protect oneself. However, when the threat is perceived and is in our mind and in the absence of a real danger, then it can become a problem. So on occasion, how do we know that it might be a problem? Is usually in the regular form of everyday stressful situation, like crossing the street, driving on a snowy road with some icy patches, and one does not know where the ice patch really is. That anxiety under those circumstances are usually short-lived. They are not protracted, and as I said, they serve a purpose. However, in situations where we perceive a threat when it does not actually exist, the consequences of that kind of anxiety, which is protracted over a period of time, can have consequential effects for our daily functioning. And that's where we need to be able to differentiate these two kinds of anxiety. And if it is the latter, if you find that it is happening more often, it is happening for longer periods of time, then I think we need to seek help. So the problem then arises in the ways we cope or deal with the real or perceived threat. So those are very important notions, perceived or real.
Okay. Can I ask you a question? Sorry, when you're finished there. When you're finished, I need to ask you a question. It's kind of related to what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. And anytime, Stuart, questions are most welcome. So my way of looking at anxiety is that anxiety is experiencing that which has not happened as real. That's what I mean by perceived. And if this happens on a regular basis and for unknown reasons, then it is useful and important to seek help. Yes, Stuart, go ahead.
So this is kind of related to the same question Maria is asking about. Now, I'm not trying to generalize it in any specific way, but what happens if you are a survivor of trauma? Now, I could use CSA as an example because that's what we work with already, but just a survivor of trauma. So would their experience and anxiety be super accentuated on top of this with what's going on already? So would it be like how those symptoms would occur now for somebody that's had that experience with this on top of it? How would that affect them?
Excellent question, Stuart. And for now, if you can bear with me, I will say to briefly answer that question, because I will be getting into the different types of anxieties.
Okay.
You bring a very important dimension to the experience of anxiety. When individuals have experienced trauma, and trauma, as you have specifically mentioned, related to childhood sexual abuse, yes, that adds a dimension. And what can happen as a result of that trauma, one has a more heightened sense to one's environment, whether it's real or perceived, whatever the threat may be. Because experiencing that kind of trauma, you can, one becomes heightened to what are the signals. In some individuals, they always looking at, Is the environment safe? Am I okay? Is this person safe to interact with? And that kind of doubt of self and the other, while it can be very protective and useful, it is a question of degree and how debilitating it is. So I'm going to talk about now some of the manifestations of anxiety, and I'm going to link it to different areas, the feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. So what are the manifestations at the feeling levels? And these are some of the symptoms. If one is experiencing anxiety, usually one is fearful, one has a sense of worry, unease, and not being sure. And if these persist, then we need to look into this more deeply. What about thoughts? Thoughts, like something is the matter with me. And the self-talk can be, I am weak. Am I losing my mind? I cannot do this. These are thoughts that one can engage in. And this is a kind of self-talk. So that's another manifestation that can feed the anxiety. At the behavioral level, when a person is anxious, one of the symptoms can be that the person behaviorally, what the person does is withdraws. One engages in avoidance. One engages in postponing. One also behaviorally expects so much out of oneself that one puts the pressure, for example, of being perfect, because it is coming from somewhere. These kind of feelings, thoughts, and behavioral manifestations are coming from somewhere. So the question then to ask is to ask oneself, what is the underlying cause or causes of these feelings? Of putting so much pressure of wanting to be the best, wanting to be perfect, or postponing because one thinks that I'm not good enough. I'll never amount to what I expect of myself or what others expect to, and the feelings of being worried and at unease. So what are the beliefs underlying it? And often when we start looking at what is the belief or beliefs that are feeding these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, we find that the person is telling oneself, well, I am timid. I'm a timid person, I'm a weak person, I'm a failure. And I bring the belief and these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors because I think, particularly when one takes as the approach as I do, a mindful approach to cognitive behavior therapy, or also a trauma-informed and emotional focused therapy, I find that exploring beliefs is very important. So now specifically, what are some of the symptoms? Shortness of breath, racing heart or palpitations, muscle tension and sweating could be some of the symptoms. Nausea and irritability. Okay, those are just a few to mention. And in fact, I would be amiss if I don't mention one, that is chest pain. I know in my personal experience, when I was going through, periods of heightened anxiety, I had chest pains, so much so that at one time, actually twice, I ended up having to go to emergency because the chest pains were very pronounced. So those are some of the symptoms that we need to keep in mind. Now, remember I talked about the natural nervousness and kind of anxiety that serves a purpose in our regular lives. But what's also helpful to know about anxiety is that we need to look at it on a continuum, that there is from mild to moderate to severe. So when one asks oneself the questions that I outlined in terms of one's feelings, in terms of the thoughts, behaviors, the beliefs, and the persistence of these things, and the impact that it has on the consequences of our daily functioning, I think it's very, very useful to look at it in terms of the continuum. So if it goes from moderate to severe, and if it is persistent, then I think one should look out for help. There are different types of anxiety, and I'll just touch upon them because each one can be a talk show on its own. But the different types of anxieties, one most commonly known one that is phobia, different kinds of phobias. And it is an anxiety experiencing intense fear of something specific, and which impacts one's daily functioning. So, for example, agoraphobia, also claustrophobia, are examples of the phobias. Then there's panic disorder and panic attacks. People who have experienced childhood sexual assault, in my practice, I have come across both these kind of experiences where they talk about claustrophobia and they talk about panic and have panic disorders. The other one too is social anxiety disorder. And Stuart, you mentioned, the layers. And these are some of the layers that we see in addition that people may, sometimes, not always, and not in every situation, have these kind of different layers to to anxiety. In addition, the social anxiety disorder, for example, is the extreme self-consciousness in social settings. Fear of being in any kind of social interactions, which can lead to a panic attack. And what happens is the person usually deals with them by avoiding such situations and isolating themselves. And what that does, that can compound the anxiety and also compound any other underlying mental health issues. All right. So with the help of intervention from therapists, counselors, medical professions, one can tease out these different layers. Another form of anxiety is separation anxiety disorder, which arises from actual physical separation or the thought of separation from a specific person, place, or thing. Okay. Another form of anxiety is the Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, OCD, which is the uncontrolled, reoccurring thoughts and behaviors one feels, the need to complete or repeatedly engage in a particular action, otherwise feels that there are going to be consequences. And the last one is the post-traumatic stress disorder. Usually begins after a specific traumatic incident, and these are replayed continually in one's mind. And you can see this being manifested by individuals who have experienced different kinds of traumas. So I hope, Stuart, this answers some of your question about childhood sexual abuse and how anxiety could be an effect, or is it a cause of the trauma of childhood sexual abuse? And that is something that we have to unpack and work with in each individual case.
Thank you. And to the last part you're suggesting now, I mean, I've used CSA as an example, but that could be any type of trauma where it would expedite itself like that, right? Is that correct?
Yes, because what we have, one of the most, we also have what's called generalized anxiety disorder. And very often with generalized anxiety disorder, not in all cases, but very often we find what we call comorbidity, another challenge with regards to one's health, well-being, both physical and mental. And I put it in those terms, well-being, general well-being, physical and mental, because these have to be seen all together. They cannot just be seen as mental. They cannot just be seen as physical. They have to be seen as interacting with each other, and how do they compound or make the situation for the person who's dealing with anxiety more complex.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I can relate to what you're saying in other situations, because I know, having gone through domestic violence and mental, physical abuse, whatever, I actually had to go on a heart monitor because my anxiety in my chest was so bad. It was so painful that they put me on a heart monitor to check out my heart. So I totally relate to what you were saying there. But going on from that, when I first started facilitating at the Gatehouse, again, it's too much, what's the word, you're too self-aware. And the anxiety also then again showed up in my chest, to the fact that I would wear a rose quartz crystal in my bra at the time to help relieve that anxiety, until I worked through my stuff enough that I could physically set up that boundary, that I wasn't taking on other people's energies. Because not only was it my anxiety, I can feel it when other people are anxious in the room. So then it also comes to my chest. So I had to learn those physical boundaries first before I could remove that crystal out of my bra. So just sharing that.
Yeah, Nicola, thank you so much for sharing that, because what you have demonstrated there is what I think I said earlier on: self-awareness, becoming aware,
Yes.
acknowledging what one is feeling is so important, because that is what helps us then develop ways, come up with our own ways of dealing with or managing the anxiety. And the profound message in what you shared is that we can each one of us, find ways to cope with that anxiety so that our daily functioning is not affected. And in doing so, through awareness, acknowledgement, and coming up what one is doing again, and you hear me bring this in so many ways and so many topics that I talk about, is that one is exercising one's agency. One is exercising choice, and to say, you know what, I have it in me to manage this. I am not going to allow this to take over my life. You know, and if the ways that we come up with may sometimes need additional modalities or additional ways. So, for example, when I talk into management, so that's when we need to seek help sometimes, and seeking help is not a weakness.
Exactly. Thank you.
You know, and I can relate so much to what you're talking about as well. And the reason why I asked you too as well about the CSA on top of that is because all my feelings that I've been getting are very similar to what I've already experienced before with this pandemic. So they're familiar feelings, but they're just a little bit different this time around. You know what I mean by a little bit different this time around, obviously because of what's going on, but different in a sense that, well, I'm aware of it. Obviously, I'm aware of it. That's which is a good thing, but it just seems different, and it just seems like I have no control. As before, I had no control, but then I did make control by going help myself and getting help for myself. But this time around, well, I can't help myself because I'm stuck at home like everybody else. And yes, I have the same feelings, and yes, I'm aware of that, and I know what I need to do so I don't think like that or believe that, because all those things, everything from the tight chest, all I can totally relate.
And Stuart, what you are raising is that, you see, again, there are so many different reasons why a person might feel the stress, why a person might feel anxious. And then the degrees of anxiety can often be related to what is the underlying cause. So what you have done, again, as I mentioned to Nicola, the awareness, the acknowledgement led you to differentiate the different types of anxiety, the anxiety that you experience pre-pandemic and during pandemic, right? And to be realistic, there will be anxiety post-pandemic, right?
I'm
Let's
looking
not
forward to that.
let's not kid ourselves. So by having these kind of discussions, we're looking at the differences, what are the different causes, and how, and what you reveal there again is through that acknowledgement and that awareness and acknowledgement is then by differentiating that my anxiety is different now in the pandemic, during this pandemic and pre-pandemic, help you to come up with perhaps different ways of coping with it. And based on the realization that there are certain things that are beyond your control. So for example, the decision of the lockdown is beyond our control. But we have to honor that decision because the pandemic is a concern not only for us as individuals, but for us as members of a community. And to put it in perspective that, you know what, I can only control this by controlling my behavior. So let me respect let me respect the lockdown guidelines and protocols so that I can do mine. And also tell myself that, you know what, this is a lockdown. It has a beginning and an end. And let me do my best so that I can hope that the end comes sooner than later. You see? So again, it all starts with awareness, acknowledgement, and then looking at what can I do, or whom can I go to, or whom can I talk to about this? And you'll be surprised how many people right now are feeling this kind of anxiety. And so talking about it not only helps us learn from each other in terms of ways of coping, but what it helps with is taking the feeling of, oh, this is only unique to me. There's something wrong with me. I'm the only one that's feeling this way. So that's one of the things that talking about it helps. The other thing is it takes the stigma out of issues like anxiety, depression, and other mental health and physical issues. So talking about it, raising awareness is very, very important. So I really thank you and Nicola for having these kind of sessions, and Maria for facilitating this too and inviting me. It seems, it's an incredible public service, and particularly to our Gatehouse community and supporters.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Sabra.
Thank you.
Maria, did you want to add anything to this before we go on to the next question?
Sure, Stuart. Thank you for asking. I was thinking about when Sabra was speaking, the first time that I actually had a panic attack a few years back. This is more than a decade, but as our wonderful brain is, we can remember things instantaneously and be in the present with it. I had no idea what was happening to me, and I ended up in the hospital. And I'm super grateful to the doctor at Emerge at Women's College, because he was the one that said, we've done all these tests. It sounds like you had a panic attack. That was the first time I had ever heard those words. I was like, what is he talking about? I was not in the mental health services field at the time, was working a very corporate, active, busy job, mom of 2 little ones, mortgage, bills, all those things, right? So all those stressors impacted the way I was feeling. I didn't even know what I was feeling. At that time, I wasn't even paying attention to, this is some disorder or this is some presentation, or I didn't know any of that. I was just like reacting, living in survival mode, if you want to call it that, because that's exactly what was happening. Until that doctor said that to me, and I was like, what is panic disorder? What do you mean? Like in our culture, we talk about being nervous a lot, right? If nervousness is an acceptable condition, where I'm from anyway. But we don't talk about anxiety disorder or panic disorder or any of those things. We talk about being nervous. So those symptoms of, I had symptoms that are similar to another condition that Nicola and I talked about recently, but hot flashes, shakiness, and actual shakes, like trembling. And I was like, I was freezing, and then I was okay. And then I was freezing, I was okay. I was like, what is this? And when I explained that to the doctor, he was like, yeah, it's panic. It's manifestation of that. So not dealing with the stressful feelings I was having at the time of all those things I was experiencing, trying to move past it, move forward from it without actually addressing what was going on, led me to have that panic attack. So that happened twice in my life. And I'm so glad that since more than a decade ago, it hasn't happened, because I've been managing the symptoms of it. I've had a lot of the thoughts that Sabra talked about when she was talking about being perfect and all these things. I was like, Sabra, I didn't know you were going to talk about me this whole show. Come on. I was like, wait a minute, hold on a second. Those are exactly what I struggle with. So yeah, me too to that. And anyone who's watching, one of the cool things about this, yes, you're absolutely right, Sabra, public service, sharing the information that we have, and also sharing the message that you're not alone, you're not broken. And this anxiety that you feel, there is supports out there for it. You are not alone in that. So I just want to reiterate that for people who are watching us, because we do have some live viewers. And I want to thank everyone that's here, like listening to this, and everyone that's going to be watching this after the fact. Again, seeking that support and knowing that you're not alone.
May I just jump in there, Stuart, to something that Maria just reminded me. You mentioned hot flashes. Well, you brought something quite vividly to my mind. And I'm going to link it to anxiety. That's general anxiousness. And what I found is that my hot flashes, increased when my anxiety went up. And I'll give you an example. The work that I was doing at that time, when my systems were on full fire, and they were firing up at all ends. The only time in winter where I didn't need to wear heavy coats, and I found that my anxiety during these times, when my work entailed driving to different destinations from my office to be at a meeting, and talking about perfectionism and talking about being on time and all those kind of sense of heightened responsibility. So every time I put myself under that kind of pressure to be there on time, and I'm going through menopause, my hot flashes would just come on. And at first I said, what the hell is going on? Why is it that this? And I took a moment, and I said, wow, I know this. This is related to this anxiety about, am I going to make my appointment on time? Once I got to become aware of this relationship, and I'm talking about just general anxiety here, I'm talking about the one that is beyond moderate and towards severe. I relieved myself of the number of hot flashes that I experience in any given hour, just by controlling, having a sense of this, and relying on taking deep breaths. Okay, and we will talk about the strategies, but when you talked about hot flashes, I just had to share this. And so women who are experiencing hot flashes, monitor your anxiety, because the anxiety will increase your hot flashes. Exactly. And there is a relationship, and because physiologically, these are all interconnected. Our hormonal levels, our anxiety levels, they are connected. How our brain is going to be firing or backfiring eventually on us if we keep the sense of heightened anxiety, if we're always living in anxiety, it's going to take a very high physical toll.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing, Sabra.
Next question.
Sabra kind of alluded to it. We wanted to talk about some of the treatments that are available, that some of the strategies that you can do to mitigate anxiety. And I know for sure Sabra's going to talk about mental health ones, and I'll share some of the stuff I've been doing lately, because the pandemic affects us all. And when we have, trauma history and other histories, these symptoms could come back either the same, different, or more severe. But in your case, Stuart, you were talking about they're a little bit different than they were before. And some of mine have returned, like these lovely hot flashes are back hanging around. And having sleeplessness is another one that's happening, where I just don't fall asleep till late hours of the night or wee hours of the morning, as you want to call it. But it's some of the things that I've been doing. I'll share after. So Sabra, if you want to just elaborate a little bit on some of the strategies to mitigate anxiety.
Okay. One that I have repeated is to be aware, being mindful, and not to be afraid, and not to think of oneself as being broken and being beyond repair. By facing it head on, that is a huge step towards helping managing the stress. One simple, the other one is I talked about talking about it. Sharing our vulnerabilities is so important, because what that does opens up the space within ourselves to think about that, we are not alone in this. That and by talking about it, we find that others will open up, and that we don't have to suffer in private. So let's talk about it. Let's break the stigma. Let's not live in shame about anxiety, because there's nothing shameful about anxiety. Okay? Be purposefully trying to shift one's focus. And that comes with that awareness and acknowledgement. Be looking at the big picture is also very important. Where is this coming from? What is happening? And I said, what is within my control? What is within or external to the sphere of my control? Nurture creative expressions, your hobbies. Let go of the past. Exercise, healthy eating, sleeping well, seeking help from professionals. Sometimes we need to be open to also pharmaceutical help in some situations, particularly when one is dealing with severe generalized anxiety, when it is on that continuum towards severity, moderate to severity, depends. And I think sometimes pharmaceutical meds are useful. So talking about that awareness and focusing on the big picture, things come to mind. Some tips are being able to reframe. Remember earlier I talked about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and the belief systems underneath it or below it, underlying it, that feed those feelings of not being worthy or not being good enough, or the thoughts that I am unable to do it, I can't do this, or the behavioral manifestations where one withdraws because one feels that one is not good enough. The strategy, and a very helpful strategy, is reframing our anxious thoughts. And we can do that in various ways. One is by looking at the big picture and talking to people about it, because our self-assessment needs to be checked from time to time. Our assessment of ourselves may not be in sync with the truth or how others experience us. And that can really open up many opportunities for self-healing, for changing our perceptions of ourselves. And it also opens up opportunities for living fully. So how we can do that, aside from talking to somebody else, is writing down what one is feeling, what one is thinking, what is happening, what is causing one's anxiety. So recently I was working with somebody who was going for a job interview, and this person is someone who has been dealing with generalized anxiety disorder. And writing down the situation and having this person, helping this person identify what this person was feeling, thinking, we were able to map out different things together as to what this person could do by just writing down the feelings, writing down the thoughts, because what the person did realize in that process is that some of the feelings and were not in sync with this person's assessment of the situation and of himself. Okay. And once that person was able to come to that kind of understanding, the person was able to think about alternative ways to replace that negative thought, alternative ways of reframing that thought that was stopping this person from feeling that he was capable of going for that interview and believing that he was going to give it his best shot. And one of the very important things that came through for him was that anxiety previously was affecting the goals that he had for himself. So by coming to a sense of knowing that his assessment of self was not in sync, the person was then able to refocus, look at the bigger picture and look at what are his goals, what are his short-term goals, what is the intermediate and long-term, and get the support by talking to people, knowing where, which people to talk to so that they can give you some ideas about the job, about that area, that environment, so on and so forth. So I think that's a very useful tip, which I call reframing those thoughts and feelings that don't serve us so that we can actually change our behaviors. And otherwise, this is a vicious cycle, the connection between feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. So we need to break that vicious cycle, right? And we can do it by reframing our thoughts, by interrupting the negative, self-defeating thoughts. Now, there are other ways of managing anxiety. Self-care is very, very important. Spending time with those that care for us. Take regular breaks. Unplug from social media. Social media and the internet can really intensify our feelings through comparing ourselves with others. And by doing that, what it can do for individuals, it actually feeds those negative thoughts and feelings that I spoke about earlier and have mentioned many times. Those self-defeating thoughts, those thoughts that sabotage ourselves. Okay. And social media, we need to not only unplug, but we need to really monitor. And unplugging from social media is very, very important aspect of self-care, because if we don't do that, it's going to take us through a very dark, dark hole. And coming out of that dark hole can be very, very challenging, because the deeper you go into it, the more difficult it becomes to get out of it.
Because on that note, Sabra, I was thinking we could talk about that when we talk about depression on the 25th,
Sure.
Because there's a link between social media activity and depression as well. Like there's some studies there that we
Okay.
can talk for sure.
So the other techniques are grounding techniques. For example, mindful activities like, I mentioned meditation earlier, deep breathing, connect with nature, go for a walk. The walk, I'm a big believer in walking because I just find engaging with nature. Nature has so much to offer, not only in terms of visually, in terms of what we see, but also through sound, through sight, through smell, to touch. It can engage all our senses. And so so getting in touch with our surroundings is very, very important. And in that exploration, you're actually focusing outside of some of those debilitating feelings and thoughts. And self-compassion, self-forgiveness are aspects of self-care. As Maria knows from working with me on these topics, that I am a huge believer and proponent of self-forgiveness and self-care, because I see these as radical acts. They are radical acts because what it does help us do is take control of our agency, take control of empowering ourselves and making choices that are coming from within a authentic and a truthful space, rather than trying to satisfy everybody else that is influencing us from externally. And particularly when those external factors we know are detrimental or we've experienced as detrimental. And this is why being aware of our physical, social, economic, financial, all those the aspects of our environment, and particularly now during the pandemic, is even more important than ever. It's always important, but right now people are seeing how all these things are affecting them. Physical activity. I mentioned walks, but Nicola can talk about yoga.
Absolutely.
I'm a proponent of yoga. So Nicola, I'm going to turn it to you. And how would you see yoga as a way to help somebody dealing with anxiety?
Well, with yoga, you're using the breath. So when you use the breath, that helps to relieve the anxiety. And there's certain yoga poses in particular that will help you to relieve that one, such as child's pose, shavasana. And because we're moving the bodies in different ways, it helps to recenter all the chakras or energy centers throughout the body. So when we come up towards the end of a yoga class and we reset the body in either child's pose, shavasana, or whatever, you have that feel-good feeling, or the good endorphins, which are, generated throughout the body to get into that good, yummy space. So, but breath is everything, because when you move and you're moving with breath, the body will flow into grace and ease, and it's just that whole, that feel-good factor that comes into being. So it's and it also exercises the parasympathetic nervous system, which again will relieve anxiety. So yeah, it's a really good tool to use for anxiety for sure.
Absolutely.
And pranayama breath, right? So like the inhale for say 4, exhale longer. So inhale for 4, hold, and then exhale for 6. So the breath work is really, really important too.
Thank you so much, Nicola. In terms of the breath work, one of the things that, I mentioned to individuals, that if anything, this pandemic has reinforced for us the importance of breath and the life force that it is, and a tool that we have within us, and how we can use it. And what you have just shared with us is phenomenal, that it has so many different benefits
Mm-hmm.
And you touched upon the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and exactly in terms of the brain and the hormones and how this is all interconnected, and
And it also affects the vagus nerve too. So when you do that deep breathing, the vagus nerve, which also connects obviously the brainstem to the heart, to the lungs, to the abdomen, which again affects everything. So you're actually dealing with the central nervous system then, which is vital for really essential health, right? So
yeah. And one of the things that the studies have revealed, which ancient knowledge from different cultural heritages, now we know scientifically that there was so much merit to these old traditions. So, for example, now during the pandemic, one of the things that people are talking about is the child pose
yes.
and how important that is. And it's called proning. So if people want to look it up, and again, that comes from these ancient cultures and how useful it is to engage in. So, and that's related to yoga as well, and other heritages as well, not only yoga. So, so there's yoga, exercises, martial arts. Dance is another wonderful way of dealing with anxiety. And I'm going to mention one more, but I'm going to turn this over to Maria to share with us what are the benefits of one of the techniques of coping with managing one's anxiety, and that technique is called journaling. And Maria, if you would share with us why journaling could be helpful, please.
For sure. I do journaling, and I suspect this is why Sabra turned it to me on this one. It's a practice, first of all and foremost. And it doesn't have to be, for anyone that's considering doing journaling, there's so many ways to do journaling. You don't have to write out, 16 pages a day or carve out 2 hours of your day to journal write. There are these wonderful lists out there. Actually, someone shared this with me, the 52 lists of happiness that I use. That's one tool. So every day there's a different list, gratitude focused. Some people do gratitude journaling, so daily lists of gratitude. Some just freehand journal write. So this is how I do it. I just freehand whatever comes up out of my thought process for the day onto the journal. I don't do it every day. There are days where I find myself, wow, it's been a week. And then I go back and actually, because I write the date, I go back and I notice I've stayed away for a week. Why? What's happening? Why haven't I put the time there? Or am I dealing with things okay enough and don't need the journal? But for me, the journal helps to process the thoughts. We have hundreds of thousands of thoughts all the time as human beings. And if we have trauma history, some of those thoughts are going to be more negatively inclined. They're going to be shame-based thinking. They're going to be limiting beliefs that are going to be operating in the background there. And our thoughts are, I can't do this, or I'm not worthy of this, or why bother? I'm not going to try. I'm afraid. Those kinds of things might surface. So it's important to see what the themes are of your thinking. And if you're working with a therapist, they're likely going to recommend that you journal write, because it's not something that is in our always awareness. So the journal helps to bring attention to what are the themes that are surfacing in your day-to-day routines or thought processes or feelings. So if you're sitting with the feeling of anxiousness and you're always anxious, there might be childhood stuff that hasn't been resolved, attachment issues with parents that were neglectful, or siblings who bullied you, or bullying in school. There are so many different types of trauma and different types of adverse experiences that people go through in life that we don't realize how much those experiences impact us later on as adults. I wanted to also hear from Stuart, because Stuart said that his anxiety this time around is a bit different. So I want to hear about like some of the strategies that he's used as well in dealing with his different anxiety. If you're comfortable sharing that, Stuart, of course. You could always say, no, thank you.
No, it's all right. I'm quite happy to share. Yeah, they are different this time around. And, obviously I'm in a different place than I was when I first went to the Gatehouse in regards to helping myself. But What I mean by they're different this time around is they're familiar, but they're not familiar because obviously because of COVID. But that's the part that's been kind of boggling me, is because here I'm feeling these same feelings I felt before, and basically feeling that I thought I've dealt with them to any degree, and realizing, wow, that's only going so far this time around, because now those same feelings I'm feeling are probably, they're raised higher, and they seem like, well, hey, if I'm feeling depressed, why am I feeling depressed when I know when my fallback is I'm going to go and either I'm going to meditate or go for a walk or do something just to change that thought. Well, some of those things are not actually working all that well for me this time around, and I don't know why, but maybe it's just the fact that it's because it is a pandemic. I'm not too sure, but I know that if I keep going back on the tools I learned from the house in regards to grounding myself and bringing myself back down, it works, but I'm telling you, I have to work really, really hard. That feeling of despair and the worthiness, all those things are coming up exponentially this time around. And, I know it's all silliness on my part. I mean, they're good, valid feelings. I mean, silliness in a sense that here I am thinking about them again, and well, here I'm going to should on myself and say, well, I should know better. But this doesn't seem to make any difference whatsoever. Can I explain myself very well there, Maria? So what you're asking me?
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's not silly at all. It's your experience. We acknowledge you. Thank you for sharing, Stuart.
Yeah.
It's just like I think I'm grounding myself and I'm getting a hold of myself, but it's taking a bit of extra work on my part. I mean, lucky for my partner here as well, but at the same time, I don't really talk about it a whole lot. Nicola has to jive it out of me to just even talk about it to any degree.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I say, it's different in the sense that, I see it. It's just managing it. It's a little bit harder. That's all. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Stuart, you're absolutely right. That managing can be, and because of the pandemic and the lockdown, the uncertainty and one's livelihood, one's routines being affected is an added dimension. So what you are feeling is absolutely, authentically your feeling. We can't judge your feelings. There's nothing silly about it. But what I would say is that with all the different techniques that you are engaging in to manage your anxiety, and the ones that Nicola, Maria, and I have shared, whether it is during pandemic or outside the pandemic, what we need to keep in mind that, like anything else, we sometimes have to change up the game. So what happens if you have been doing yoga, particular kind of yoga, you might have to change something else to re-engage your body in a different way so that you experiencing it differently. You're doing journaling, do something else. If you're doing meditations regularly, instead of meditations, use another form of meditation by engaging with nature on a walk, or going outside and just sitting, or painting, or hobby. So what happens is that we need to change up the game from time to time, because it's not having the same kind of effect neurologically. Mm-hmm. So this is why we've got to, because if we become habituated with any of the coping strategies, after a while, it's like, doing something so involuntary, it becomes like involuntary. And we're not challenging and we're not engaging wholly. So I think that what leads me, I'm just going to add one more, that the tip for managing during COVID is putting a structure to our day, to our routine is very, very important. And another one is staying connected with people that we care for and the people that care about us is very important. And I've mentioned self-care, physical activity. And before we close, I just want to say that at the Gatehouse, we really, in terms of the work that we do, we believe that children, adults, youth, the old and the not so old flourish best in environments that are compassionate, caring, and nurturing. And so connecting is so important, as we have done at the Gatehouse. I think we've been, we continue with these kind of public shows. We have pivoted many of our programs. So there is no excuse to not connect in different ways. So connecting is very, very important. Yes, we recognize that we might be physically apart, but we don't have to be socially apart. All right. And that during times like COVID is very, very important, because this is how we develop community. And at the Gatehouse, our philosophy is about community through connection through community. So that's what I would leave us with, all of us.
It's awesome. Thank you, Sabra. So before we close off, any last final thoughts before we finish this off? And by the way, next week we'll be talking about depression, and maybe you could talk maybe a little bit about that, just to tease people for actually it's not next week, but the week after, the 25th, we'll be back, 25th of February. Same time, same place. But maybe you can give a little teaser on what we're going to be talking about in regards to depression, without giving away the farm, as they say.
I think Maria might be the best, but all I would say from my end in closing is that whether it's anxiety, depression, or other challenges that we have, there is hope. We cannot give up hope. And hope comes through community and connection. And one of the most important personal endowments that each one of us has to feed hope is our imagination, because that is how we ignite. Imagination helps us ignite our hope and keep it alive, so that we can live our lives as best as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maria, any last thoughts?
Sure. Well, thank you everyone for being here and for spending an hour with us talking about anxiety. Hopefully you're not anxious after this. We're leaving you with some hope again to get the support that you need for yourself, whatever your anxiety looks like. Again, you are enough and you're not alone. One of the tips that helped me as well is reducing the caffeine intake. That was another one, like physiological impact of caffeine, and others out there who do smoke as well. I don't personally. It was something I gave up a long time ago. But again, nicotine also has an impact on anxiety. So just to be aware of those two elements, and your food intake. Sometimes foods can also trigger these kinds of responses. So just to be mindful of the physical impact there. Aside from that, it's been an awesome hour with these wonderful folks that I love spending time with. I wish we could. I have another meeting to go to as well. Someone else is like, Maria, where are you? I'm like, I'm almost there. I'll be there in a few seconds. Thank you so much, Stuart, Nicola, and Sabra for having me and Sabra on here. And we look forward to seeing everyone on the 25th. I'm going to leave it with Stuart to say a final words and close off the session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Sabra, Maria, Nicola. Great show talking about anxiety. One thing I love about this is that you can go back on this, whether it be in the podcast or video, actually, as we're doing now, Periscope, Facebook. You know what I'm talking about. But folks, I hope this was really useful for you today. Give some great insight in regards to how you might be feeling or not feeling. And if you're not sure, then just reach out for help. It is about connection. So folks, don't be shy to reach out, find someone to talk. But I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us today. And well, I think we'll be back next week. But on the 20th, we'll be talking about depression. But I won't tell you what we'll be talking about next week. So I bid you all a good day, a great weekend, and take care of yourselves. And remember, self-care. If you're triggered in any way, go for that walk, listen to some music, journal, do something. But take care of yourselves. Folks, have a great week. And we'll see you again real soon. Thank you.
Take care. Never give